Thank you for joining us tonight with Truth and Reason, a practical series of studies that show us how to live daily life. And we're looking at the works of 1st and 2nd Peter and looking at the application of our daily lives and how we need to live for God. And tonight's no exception to that as we look at the topic of working. And that, of course, is working in the world. And we're going to look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 18 through 20. But first, we'd like to invite you to worship with us with the Northside Church of Christ in Russellville, Kentucky. We meet at 689 North Main Street every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock and Wednesday evenings at 7 o'clock. We offer other various studies throughout the week, so please check our website for that. Just do a Google search, and you'll find our website, which has links to our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and other resources that you can use in your daily studies. Let's get right to our study this evening as we look at the topic of working, or more accurately, being a servant. There are variations of work, you might say, but how can we best relate to these passages in our, I'll just say, modern times, for lack of a better term? But let's read the verses for our study tonight, and that's simply 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 18 through 20, and it begins by saying, "Servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. For this is commendable, if because of conscience toward God one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. For what credit is it when you are beaten for your faults? You take it patiently. But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God." Well, there's really only a portion of this passage that deals with working. The rest of it's about our attitude about being treated wrongfully. And of course, Peter's writing during a time of great persecution. He's writing during a time of slavery and other things of which people were put into servitude, you might say, that was not of their own accord. And we know the fallacies of that. We know the sins of it, the wrongfulness of being brought into bondage in that way. And but we're not exactly talking about that for the context of our lesson this evening. We are talking, though, about having the proper attitude and the right attitude, even when we're treated wrongly, perhaps in the workplace. As I said, many of us today can only relate to what we're doing in our time, where we get up and go to work, and we choose the jobs that we want for the most part, and we go to work, and we usually have to answer to someone else. But remember that the Bible also teaches us how to run a business. It teaches us how to be a good, we'll use terms like employee or employer. It teaches us how to be a good employer and treat our employees well. So it would do you well to, work for a company that's run by Christians, you might say, but those are few and far between, even though they are out there. But during the time, and of course, this is not a privilege that all our countries in the world have today, but especially during the time of the first century, though there were rules and regulations set up by the Roman government and so on, there would still be those that would be mistreated, and so this is really not about those that would mistreat you. Ironically, this isn't a lesson that Peter gives to complain about how folks are treated in the workplace and in the marketplace, and perhaps in their servitude, if they're having to perhaps work off a debt or something of that nature. There are rights, you might say, on both sides, but yet he's talking about the attitude of the Christian and those that are afflicted because of their service to God. And so this isn't a general overall straight across the board, look at just, the workplace, but it's about how the Christian deals with it and the kind of work ethic they should have. So number one, be a servant. That may sound obvious here from what verse 18 says, but what we're talking about is having an attitude of servitude, going to the workplace with an attitude that I'm going to do my best, I'm going to give my all, I'm going to work for this company, for this individual, and I'm going to do the best job, for their profit. I want to see the company I'm working for do well. You can usually tell an employee that takes pride in their work and in their job, and they make things better. They make a company money. They, strive to have all the goals and follow the rules that the company sets, because every company has their own mission statement, as they call it. They all have their own set of rules in the way that we do things here in order to accomplish our end goal. And so there are characteristics that we are to have in being a servant. And the ironic thing here is that if we can't learn to have a servant's heart and a servant's attitude in the world, we're never going to have it in the church. We're not going to have it in the kingdom of God. You can't have an attitude of just that, typical speaking, like working Monday through Friday, and then, complaining about your job the entire week, not wanting to do what the boss says, always thinking you have a better way of doing it, and then walk into a church building on Sunday and say, I'm going to do everything God's way, and I'm going to serve Him with my whole heart and my humble attitude. That kind of humility isn't something you can just turn on and turn off, especially on a Monday through Friday where you turn it off and expect to walk into the church building on a Sunday morning and turn it on. So that's the direction we're going with our talk this evening in regard to how we should work and be a servant. So what we learn in the world, which starts in the home, perhaps with our work that we should do for our parents around the house, what husbands and wives are to be doing in order to maintain a home, those work ethics are usually shown later on when a person starts taking on work in the world. And they can see a distinction, especially among the youth. And what they find among the young is a certain mentality, whether it's, the social norms of the day, the privileged few that, work with a sense of entitlement, that I'm here, I'm going to put my hours in, you're going to pay me regardless. We need to have a certain work ethic, you might say, to be worthy of our hire. And the Bible talks a lot about that in regard to a laborer being worthy of his wages. Why? Because he's laboring? No, because he's doing a good job, because he's doing that which brings profit, to those that he is working for. And you can see that in a Christian's attitude. You can see that in their heart. And so employers would do good to hire true Christians. And because, we're kind of on our toes, you might say, and we want to make an extra effort not to let them down, because that reflects on who we are in our character, who we are as individuals, and taking God with us everywhere that we go. So we must be submissive. We must be respectful. And, remember a few just key basic things. Remember, you're paid by them. It's the old saying, who signs the checks kind of thing. And I know we say that jokingly, but at the same time, there's validity to that. When we are taking money from someone else, even for the work that we have done, remember, it's coming from them. They have hired us for a particular job, and we need to do that job. We are obligated to them when we sign on to do that. We also need to know our place. Too many employees want to be employers. And that's a good goal to have. But it's not something that you express while you're on the job. In other words, you need to realize who's in authority here. Who is in management? Who has worked their way up? Who is the one that set the rules, made the rules? And yes, there are always going to be rules in a company that, aren't always perfect. And you're going to see that, especially as an employee. You're going to work hard at your job, and you're going to see where a company can make some improvements. You have the right and the ability to go to your bosses and say, hey, can we sit down and talk about the future of this company? Can we talk about my place in this company? But you don't work behind the line and start telling the manager what to do. You don't go home and start complaining about your job and saying, oh, what a bunch of idiots they are because they don't know how to run a business. Well, the truth of the matter is a lot of them do know how to run a business. We just differ on opinions. So we need to be careful with that. I hear that a lot in the world. You can walk down the aisles of some grocery stores and you can hear employees talking, and most of the time they're off in the corner. A couple of them, you'll catch them behind a certain aisle, and they're complaining about the boss. They're complaining about the work hours. They're complaining about the company as a whole. And sometimes they're right, but a lot of times they're wrong. A lot of times their attitude is not in the right place to just accept the responsibility that's given to them and the privilege that's given to them to be able to work. And I speak as a person living in the comforts of the United States of America. I've worked many jobs in my life, but I also, set many standards for the jobs that I did, because I knew that when I walked into a particular company, if I didn't establish right up front that I needed to worship God on a Sunday, well, they would schedule me on a Sunday. And so I remember one time a man said, well, then you can't work for me. And I said, okay, I understand that. And I turned around and walked away, and he called me back. He said, well, wait a minute. He says, what if you came in after church? And I said, okay, we can work that out. And so here was somebody that was willing to work with me around my church schedule, you might say. So you're going to find people like that. They all won't do that, but you're going to find people like that that are willing to work with you if you're straightforward with them up front. Because, hey, what do? You go to get a job, all right? And what do? You set the terms of how many hours you're going to work. A lot of them will advertise, we're hiring for part-time or for full-time. These are the benefits that we offer. This is the pay that we're going to get. Nobody walks into a job and just says, hey, pay me whatever you want. Just put me on the schedule whenever you want. Make me do whatever you want. Generally, people don't do that. And, we set a lot of terms before we walk in. Now, there has to be a little back and forth, and there has to be some agreements between the parties, but ultimately it comes down to this. You make the request of what you desire and what you want, and they, in most cases, good people will work with you. So you go into these situations with the understanding that you're going to put God first in your life, that you're not going to make this a thing that's going to interrupt the workplace. You're going to know your place, you're going to know the authority, and you're going to know who's in charge here. And you'll find that you will be respected from the get-go. And that's just the way it is in the world. Because even among, the worst of heathens, I've been treated with high respect by atheist people, just because they saw in me perhaps a work ethic, or the fact that I believed in the Lord and I believed in something and I applied my life to it. They can look at you and say, well, if you're willing to be that devoted to something, maybe you'll be devoted to this, the thing they're offering. You see what I'm saying here? It's about character. And so when you know your place, you know who's in charge and authority, work tends to go a lot better. But also, you're going to be working for sometimes people that are harsh and people that aren't right. Now, granted, today we have the opportunity to quit a job and go find another one if you're fortunate enough. And I know jobs have been a little tough lately to come by in some places because of the virus and all. But I'm not talking about the particular time period that we're living in. If it's an extended thing over a period of time, we'll talk about it. But we're just talking about the opportunities that are given to us. And what I mean is that, if you don't like where you're working, you can change your job. If you feel that you're stuck in a situation because of life circumstances and all, then sometimes you're going to be working for people that won't treat you right, that won't work with you in your schedule. How do you deal with that? You deal with it with the same attitude that a Christian would in a good situation. You deal with it with godliness. You deal with it with respect. You go to this person, just like it says in the scripture here, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. You are to be submissive. You're to know your place. And I know that's tough. In fact, that's one of the greatest trials that you're going to have in the workplace, are working for people that don't respect you for who you are, that don't respect you for, your love for God. And in fact, what you find in Peter's day is that it had exactly the opposite effect. Not only were they disrespected, but they were persecuted for that very purpose. And still today in our world, there are some countries that are out there that are so anti-Jesus Christ and Christian that people that have come to the Lord have been fired from their jobs. They've lost their livelihood. And you're going to hear stories like that. And so I hope that I'm speaking to people, at least at this point, that realize you are very fortunate. You are lucky and privileged, especially as Christians, to have the opportunities that will come your way. It doesn't mean that things won't be tough. And I'm not preaching your wealth, religion here. I'm not saying that you turn to God and you're going to have the job that you want. You're going to make the money you want and blah, blah, blah. That's TV evangelist stuff, and that's unscriptural. We can't say that. Jesus said the poor you'll have with you always. And you know what? Sometimes that's among Christians as well. Because Jesus observed godly people giving all that they could to the Lord when all they had was really nothing. But because they gave it from their heart, like the widow and her 2 mites, because she gave it from her heart. Jesus said she put in more than anyone that came and put in of their abundance. And so it's about attitude, it's about heart, it's about who you are as a person, and that's who you want working for you, and with you for that matter. But let's look at verse 19 for just a moment, because it gets into this area of persecution that sometimes, we feel we're persecuted. I can't compare ourselves to the persecutions of the first century, but I will say this: don't compromise when you take on a new job. Number one, it is commendable to endure grief. It's commendable in the eyes of God to deal with the grief of man. And sometimes you're going to have that. Sometimes, and a lot of times, you're going to have work environments that are quite frankly just probably the most worldliest places that you'll ever see. The work environment is sometimes where people grow up, especially, young Christian people who have had relatively good influence throughout their life. They see a lot of the evil that's out there in the world when they go to work. And again, that gets back to a decision that you need to make. What kind of jobs do I need to get? What kind of place do I need to work? What kind of bosses? Remember that when someone interviews you for a job, you're interviewing them as well. And so you kind of want to get a read of the situation. And this is a problem, especially in a lot of businesses where a lot of young people, take on a job like fast food restaurants and things like that. They're not all bad. But I will say this: I've seen a lot of sinfulness in the employees of people and their demeanor in life and their apathy toward responsibility, just in the way they serve me a hamburger. And you can gauge a lot about a person just from the way they treat you in a few moments. And with that, in regard to that, if you were a person that owned a business and somebody didn't give you very good service, you wouldn't want to hire them to work for your company, would you? But every once in a while, you run across an individual that really just seems to be outstanding, no matter what they're doing, even if they're serving you a hamburger. And you would think, if I had a business, I would hire that person. And I'll tell you what, that's somebody that you want to kind of keep your eye on as well, because as we like to say in the world, they're going places. But then you look deeper as well. Are they a person with a Christian ethic, a Christian attitude? And you see that in some places as well, because that's something that we as Christians should watch for and center our lives around, spending time with people that are of a godly nature. So don't compromise. Don't go into a workplace, and start partaking of the evils that are there. Don't feel like you've got to fit in with an immoral crowd. Don't think that you have to go with them after work to the local bars or whatever. Don't think that you have to go with them on the weekends to their home parties, especially where alcohol and things like that are offered. Don't think you have to share with them in their immorality, perhaps their dirty jokes talked about off to the side. And I could just go on and on with the list of things that we see in the workplace. And, a lot of times those things are forbidden in a workplace. And sometimes the workplace is a protected environment. But what happens, after that? What happens when these are the people that you associate with the most and you feel compelled to be friends with them? So don't compromise your Christian principles. Don't compromise letting the light of Christ shine in your dealings with these people. Understand, too, that according to verse 19, that sometimes you're going to be wronged. You're going to be accused. You're going to be, they're going to look at you and say, you're not a good worker. You're not cooperative. You're not willing to give 100%, especially if you're one of those, I've got to go to church on a Sunday kind of people. And people will find reasons to, dislike you for that. We're going to have to deal with that in the world, no matter where we go. And sometimes it's going to be hard to find a safe environment to work in. Just be aware of some of those things. But as I said, never compromise. Be commended to God for standing what's right, even when you are treated wrongfully. And at least at night you can sleep with a clear conscience. Don't let the troubles of the world trouble you. Don't go to work and be surrounded by all these things and take that home with you. Some jobs are best left on the job. But take your comfort in God, take your clear conscience and your character and your work ethic with you home, and let that be the person that you are. And don't let somebody of the world destroy that in you. And that leads us to our last point from verse 20. that we read a few moments ago. For what credit is it if when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? If I've done something wrong, then I deserve the just punishment. And sometimes that means a demotion or a cut in pay, or maybe even being fired for that matter. And if it's in regard to making the comparison to work, be patient in your suffering. Accept, responsibility when you're at fault. Accept the consequences of those things. But also, on the other hand, he says in verse 20, when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. Sometimes we get our just due, but when it comes to suffering for what we haven't done, well, that's a whole other beast entirely. That's what we're talking about here in regard to the character of our attitude, our work ethic, getting back to that point. And again, if you do good and suffer, it's commended to the Lord. If you do good, and though you're not at fault, sometimes just accept responsibility. Remember that you're working for someone else. Remember that you're working for a company. And sometimes you may not be directly responsible for something negative that happens. Maybe it's a lost sale or something or another. And whatever comparison you might make, just sometimes be the person that's willing to take the responsibility for it. Lift your employers up, lift your managers up, lift your bosses up. And the ironic thing about that is that not only will you be showing the Christian attitude in encouraging someone else, but you're probably going to make some new friends from that as well. Because believe it or not, people of the world will appreciate it when you stand in for them. And I'm not talking about lying or deceiving here. A person's responsibility needs to fall on their own shoulders, but at the same time, understand we're all working together, and we're watching out for each other, and we're helping each other. So sometimes we just need to take a little responsibility for the work that's being done. And, if it's bad service in a particular establishment, though you may be doing your job, understand, what am I doing to help someone else do theirs as well, and to make the workplace easier on them? Sometimes we just isolate ourselves so much to our job, and we look at someone else and perhaps their faults and not, completing their particular work, and we say, well, that's not my job. We can't have that attitude. And if we're a person that's always saying, it's not my job, well, then we're probably not doing our own job very well either. And we need to be respectful for others and to others, and to lift them up, to encourage them, and you're going to make for a better work environment altogether. So this is just one aspect of the workplace. Certainly we could look at this lesson in regard to servitude as a whole, especially in the kingdom of God, because it's important to note that, when the scriptures teach us to, if a man does not work, neither shall he eat. Obviously, we're talking about physical things here, but you can also look at it in a very spiritual way, that a man's not going to grow very much spiritually if he doesn't apply himself in working for the Lord. He's not going to grow in relationships with others if he does not work on those relationships. So there are many ways to take some of these lessons, and we could probably do a whole series just on these 3 verses here. But we need to have a work ethic. I want to share with you in closing just a few passages that we can look at that the Bible says, and really I've got like 4 pages, but I'm just going to read 1 page. And just read through these quickly. If you didn't catch them all, you can rewind the video and watch it again. But Colossians 3:17, whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Colossians 3:23, in the same chapter, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. Remember, the Lord is always watching as well. And if you're doing a good job in his sight, then the right men will also stand up and take notice. 2 Thessalonians 3:10, for even when we were with you, we would give you this command, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. Proverbs 16 and verse 3, commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. Proverbs 12, verse 11, whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8, I quoted this a moment ago. This is the English Standard Version, by the way. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So God places a lot of importance on our human work ethic. And what he sees us doing in the world is what he sees us doing spiritually. Proverbs 13:4, the soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. Psalm 128 and verse 2, you shall eat the fruit of the labor of your hands, you shall be blessed, and it shall be well with you. And then Matthew 5:16, in the same way let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. And then finally, 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 31, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. So wherever you are, give God the glory. Show God's glory to your workplace that's out there in the world, to your neighbors in the neighborhood that you live in, among your family and relatives and friends. Show them the light of God shining in your life, and let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Thank you for joining us in our program tonight. And if we can answer any of these questions further, please let us know. Email us at northsidechurchofchrist@hotmail.com. Come and worship with us. Let's give praise to God, and we hope to see you with the Northside Church of Christ. May God bless you in your search for truth and reason.
Wait, oh.